A Boy and the Pirate Prince, Book 1, written by Matthew Korak. Episode 1, A Journey North. The caravan lumbered along the hard-packed road, and Bijan followed. With the shackles removed, walking was easier, save for the blisters that had formed on his soles and toes. He had never walked this much in his life, and the twine and leather sandals he wore did little to pad or protect his uninitiated feet. The blisters caused him to limp, a scrawny and starved lad of 12 or 13. He looked a shambling corpse from a distance, a demon in tow with a local merchant. The mid-afternoon air was still, and the heat from the blazing sun baked the earth. The high desert shimmered with fever, and every direction Bijan looked, he saw flat landscape dotted by shrub grass and the occasional rye tree. Their fingers splayed and stretched towards the cruel sun, bursts of dried leaves sprouting from their fingertips. Bijan hobbled in the dusty wake of the caravan, a motley crew of 3 wagons, 5 men-at-arms, and the butcher. The wagons were pulled by 2 mules each, solid wooden wheels grinding into the hard earth at their passing, and each piloted by a grim-faced coachman armed with a whip and ill temper. The coachmen were swathed in white cream silk to protect from the sun, and behind their wooden coach seats was the cargo that was being carried. They were objects unknown, stored and piled atop each other, covered in heavy canvas to protect from the elements and prying eyes. Walking to either side of the caravan were the men-at-arms. Like the coachmen, they were wrapped in sweat-stained cream silk, their eyes peering behind slits of fabric. Bijan knew that underneath their silk robes they wore leather and bronze armor, and were hiding short swords and daggers. Unhidden were their halberds, 8 feet of hard ash tipped by cruel iron points and axe edges. They carried them at their sides or across their shoulders, the heat too much to bear the weapons at attention. Bijan lifted his hand and wiped the sweat from his brow using the edge of the linen cloth he had wrapped around his head. Sweat was good. His father had always told him that when you stopped sweating underneath the sun, you were bound for sun sickness. And out here, sun sickness was as good as death. He could hear his father talking to him, telling him to drink water. The thought of his father stung the edges of Bijan's eyes, and he fought back the urge to cry. Where was his father now? Was his father thinking of Bijan? Or had his father forgotten Bijan just as easily as he had watched his son walk away? Bijan also knew that he needed to keep close to the last wagon, to which he was falling behind. If he failed to do so, one of the men-at-arms, a short, pocked-faced man Bijan called Red-Eye, would fall back and hit him with the haft of his halberd until Bijan had caught up with the last cart. He lifted the water skin that was slung around his shoulder, removed the cork, and took a short swallow. Not too much, Bijan thought, or I won't have enough to finish out the day. He recorked the skin, slung it back over his shoulder, and quickened his pace. The road made a shallow turn from north to northeast, driving deeper and deeper into the shimmering desert. As the head of the column turned, Bijan could see its leader rounding the corner, a massive man riding atop a large warm-blood horse, a dark brown animal save for a splatter of white on its nose and face. The rider was draped in a tan linen cloak, over a white linen tunic lined with cloth of gold. Atop his head he wore a white cotton scarf, tied with a red band around the large man's crown. The scarf fell down to the base of the man's immense neck, where a silver chain hung. Even from this distance, Bijan was able to recognize the man as the butcher. As the column finished the road's turn, the butcher raised his hand and halted his horse. The wagons followed suit, their creaking frames groaning as the coachmen pulled back on their animals' reins. The men-at-arms made their way to the wagons, eager to use the little shade they provided and eat their midday meal. Bijan would like nothing more than to rest, crawling underneath a wagon to seek shelter from the sun's hateful rays. But he knew better than that. The midday stop and meal was not a time to relax, lest he be accosted by one of the column's members. He staggered to the last wagon in the column, and with deft fingers that had only learned these knots but days ago, he untied the rope that held the wagon's canvas in place. With speed, he went to work, for if he did not finish his chores quickly enough, he would have no time to enjoy the halt before they started up again. Underneath the canvas were the tools and staples for survival: barrels of water, casks of ale and wine, clay cups, a wooden bucket, and boxes of salted beef. Hopping into the back of the wagon, Bijan grabbed a large cheesecloth and opened the box that contained the salted beef. Lined with a linen sheet, inside were pounds and pounds of stripped salted beef, each the size of Bijan's hand, though half as thin and hard as rock. Bijan laid the cheesecloth out and put 16 strips into it before wrapping it up and closing the box. He gingerly jumped down from the wagon, wincing in pain from the blisters that lined his feet. "Hurry up, you little bastard," one of the coachmen yelled, standing atop his wagon seat. "The horses need watered." Bijan acknowledged, a short, "Aye, sir." His father had always told him it was wise to call everyone sir. Better to be reprimanded for undeservingly calling a stranger sir than not calling a man by his duly earned title. He hobbled to the second wagon where 3 of the men-at-arms sat, backs against the wagon wheels. The sun was almost directly above them, so the wagon only shaded the tops of their heads. Still, they had pushed their backs flush with the wagon as far as possible, if only to keep the sun out of their eyes. Bijan handed out 2 strips of salted beef to each guardsman, jumping back when Red-Eye tried grabbing an extra strip from the boy's cheesecloth. The other 2 men-at-arms laughed, and Red-Eye yelled, kicking at Bijan and cursing him for being a slow-witted bastard, staring at the boy with his bloodshot eyes, pools of pure malice. Bijan ignored the insult and continued down the column. He knew better than to give extra refection to the soldiers. Were he found out, he would be in trouble by the butcher's own hand. "You are in charge of the rations, boy," the butcher had told him on the first night of their journey north. "We have an exact amount of food and libation, and to lose or miss any will be your folly." He had pointed to the coiled whip that was attached to his saddle, 9 feet of malevolent leather. Bijan finished his first task by giving each coachman 1 strip of beef, the remaining 2 men-at-arms who sheltered at the head wagon 2 strips apiece, and the last 3 pieces to the butcher, who still sat atop his horse at the head of the column. By now, the guards and coachmen were yelling at Bijan. They were calling for ale, for water, for oats. The boy ignored them and went about his work. "I can't eat this shit without ale, you moron boy," one of the men-at-arms yelled from the first wagon, a tall and lanky fellow named Reza. Bijan ignored him as well, though Reza spoke true. Without a source of liquid, one would not be able to chew the salted beef, only suck on it. Bijan handed out cups and poured from a cask of ale, allotting each man 1 filling. After that, he tended the mules and the butcher's horse, filling a bucket from the barrels of water and giving each animal 1. He finished by hauling a sack of oat from animal to animal, letting them eat directly from the bag, before returning to the last wagon. He stored everything, got himself a cup of ale, and soaked a strip of salted beef in it. He sat on the ground underneath the last wagon, his feet burning from use, but glad to be out of the sun. In the distance, the boy saw what he thought was a desert wolf, though Bijan thought it may be nothing more than a mirage, a figment of his fool's eyes and imagination. The rear of the wagon looked south, back in the direction they came from, back in the direction where he lived, where he was born, where his family was. It had been days since he had left, yet here in the vast, flat landscape, he felt if only he squinted enough, he may be able to see the sandstone hut or wooden shanty, wood planks weathered from sun and sand. If he strained his eyes enough, Could he see the small pomegranate tree or the wooden fences he had helped his father repair? If he put his hand to his brow, leaned his neck forward, and really tried, could he see his mother? And if he could, would she be crying? Bijan's salted beef had become soft enough to eat when the call was made to move out. "Get off your asses, you lazy bastards," cried Reza. "We have the rest of the day ahead of us." He stood and the other guards followed. Bijan quaffed his ale and stuck the salt beef between his teeth, going up the line to collect the cups from the column's denizens, dodging Red Eye's half-kick as he collected his charge. He returned with empty cups and put them in their storage box before pulling the canvas down and tying it in place as the caravan began to move. The column plodded forward into the desert, with the butcher at the lead. Bijan walked behind the last wagon, far enough behind to avoid the dust, close enough to avoid a beating. He chewed on his food, his stomach growling at him for feeding it so poorly. Though he was a boy of only 12 or 13, Bijan knew he was not doing well. He placed a hand on his stomach and could feel how hollow it was. And though he ate more now than he had when he lived at home, he had never exerted as much energy as he did now. How would he be able to keep this up? Walking from sunup to sundown, always to the north. He ate his salted beef and looked behind him, squinting his eyes. In the distance, he could see a desert wolf following, checking the column's resting point for scraps of food. And try as he might, Bijan could not see his home. 2. The sun was closing in on the western horizon when they saw a small tower in the distance. Red burned in the atmosphere where the sun began to disappear behind the edge of the world, and the cloudless blue sky above began to darken into twilight. The evening winds had started, whipping through the caravan with cooling caresses, blowing Bijan's white tunic to and fro. But with the soothing touch of the wind came the stinging bite of gusting sand, and soon Bijan had wrapped his head covering around his face, leaving only a slit where his eyes were. The tower was much less a tower and more of a small two-story outpost. As they approached, Bijan could see that it was made from clay and wood, white from weatherburn. A door and 2 small windows marked the entry to the outpost. The roof of the outpost's first level acted as a terrace for the second story. A sandstone staircase abutted the outpost up to the second floor. From the second-story terrace, a wooden ladder went to the top of the building, which was lined with a waist-high clay wall and covered by thatched roof. Bijan supposed this rooftop was used to post lookouts. For the nonce, it was empty. As the column neared the tower, 2 men emerged from the door. One stood and watched the approaching travelers. The second man, armed with a longbow, climbed the stairs and ladder to the rooftop tower. He posted himself there. An arrow knocked. This was not lost on the butcher, who signaled for the caravan to halt. He rode forward, calling to the guardians at the outpost. "Ho there, guardsmen. We mean you no harm." The butcher held out his hand, showing an open palm, swollen fingers stretched to the sky. "We are passing through. Do you have water?" Bijan went to the second wagon, untied the rope holding the canvas down, and stuck his head underneath. He pulled out a set of wooden stairs, 3 steps high. He retied the rope to secure the canvas from the wind and trotted towards the front of the caravan, limping on his painful feet. The men-at-arms had positioned themselves to screen the flanks of the column, and the coachmen stood on their seats, looking for any potential danger. The only other being in sight was the sandwolf sitting in the distance, yellow eyes wide with purpose. The man on the ground level spoke, his dark cloak being whipped around his legs, one hand on the hilt of a sheathed weapon hanging from his belt. "We have a well. It's salty, but drinkable." As he traveled up the column towards the butcher, Bijan spied the well in the distance, a circular wall of stone outlined by a trestle that mounted a pulley on it. Resting on the edge of the well wall was a bucket, attached to a rope and the pulley. It has been a long day's travel, the butcher called, his voice fighting the wind for purchase. May we pull from your well and set camp? Bijan limped past the first wagon, holding the small staircase with both arms, the weight of the heavy wooden planks enough to make his arms burn with exertion. He had done this many times before and dropped it only once, to which he had received a beating for. "Aye, you may pull," the postman said, "and camp, though you must camp at least 300 paces from the tower." The butcher thanked the postman for their hospitality, his horse shifting as Bijan sidled up to it, setting the stairs underneath the stirrups. Without word or direction, the butcher handed the mount's lead to the boy. Bijan held the lead slack and put one hand on the animal's cheek, whispering and praying for the horse not to move. The butcher, with great effort, hoisted his immense mass off his mount, stepping down on the staircase and descending backwards, using the saddle as support. The butcher turned to the party and barked his command, ordering for camp to be set, pointing to the east. He addressed Bijan. "Get them fed and settled. Refill any empty casks and barrels we have with well water. Once camp has been set, see me. Bring a cask of wine, the good red. I will be parleying with the postman." The butcher did not wait for a response and turned to plod towards the outpost. Bijan looked on. He was a huge man, the butcher. Huge belly, huge hairless head, huge arms. He was not a cruel man, but suffered no folly by his minions. And despite how slow the man moved, carrying his large girth towards the outpost, Bijan knew he was dangerous. The boy turned to his duties. Like every night before, the camp was set. The wagons were circled and the animals tethered. Shrub grass and limbs from a nearby tree harvested. Man and animal fed and watered. A fire started in the center of the caravan circle. Bedrolls laid out and a watch set. Barrel and casks refilled. And throughout this process, Bijan tended to his duties, dodging insults and attacks by his fellow caravan members. The sun had set and twilight fully emerged by the time Bijan was done with his camp tasks. Duties complete, the boy walked to the outpost, a cask of wine grasped between his hands. The white stone building's two small windows were alight from within, a pair of burning eyes on a pallid face. Settled between the two windows was the door, a cobbled collection of weather-worn wooden planks, crooked teeth in a mouth so loosely fit that the light from within leaked out. Muffled laughter came from inside, and it seemed to Bijan that the building itself was speaking to him, though it was in a speech he did not understand. And whether it was warning him away or inviting him in, Bijan did not know. As he stood before the door, the outpost reminded Bijan of a tale his mother used to tell him when he was younger, before he was old enough to spend his days helping his father tend to the land and herd the goats. It was a tale about a pair of siblings who were playing in their family's field. In the distance, they saw a house, and emanating from it was the most delicious smell. The brother and sister walked and walked, and the house always seemed just out of reach, his mother had told him. Finally, they had walked so far, they realized they did not know where they were and could no longer see home. Lost and alone, the brother and sister died. It had been a story to beware mirages that lived in the desert, no matter how enticing the mirage may be. "Enter!" a clear voice yelled. It startled Bijan. He did not recall knocking on the door. He pushed on the wooden planks, holding the cask under his arm. The door squealed on old, rusty hinges, and orange light spilled out. Warm air nuzzled Bijan's face and pulled him in. The light was blinding. He stood in the doorway, one hand outstretched to protect his eyes from the glare. He blinked several times, his vision returning to him as he looked around the room. An oven was built into the wall, crackling with fire. Lit oil lamps, burning dirty, sat on sconces set in the clay walls. The walls were bare, save for a weapon rack that held the occupants' cloaks in lieu of weapons. The floor was hard-packed earth, covered by threadbare rugs made of wool and reed. On the opposite end of the room, another wooden door sat, closed and locked from within. And between him and that door were table and chairs, which sat a tall man and the butcher. "Close the door, boy," the butcher said casually. "Bring that wine here." Bijan did as he was bid. He limped across the room to the table where clay cups sat, half empty. Along with the cups were an empty cask, a rolled-up parchment, and a small pile of copper coins. The butcher put out a hand to stop Bijan and picked up his cup. He drank the rest of the liquid with a throwback of his head and put the cup back down on the table. "You don't want to mix the wine," the butcher said to his host, pointing to the cask Bijan was carrying. "This is a fine vintage, and to mix it with your fare would be a waste." His host, a middle-aged man with long, graying hair, grabbed his cup. "As you say, my good man," he said, leaning back in his chair and swilling the rest of his cup. He was a taller man, dressed in light tunic and pants, with knee-high boots that were cracked from wear and the arid desert. He put the cup back on the table. "I wouldn't want to waste a wine from one as gracious as yourself." They both chuckled, and the butcher waved a hand at Bijan. Bijan stepped forward and filled both cups. They each grabbed their vessels and clinked their drink together. The host drained his cup, wiping the excess from his lips with the back of his hand. He belched and smiled. "You are not lying, sir," he said to the butcher. "This is a fine wine. I haven't had a taste of something so good in a long while. As you can imagine, we don't get good wine out here. Even less so with the talk of war." The butcher was sipping his wine and shook his head. "There is always talk of war." "Aye, but some talk is more serious than others, and some things I have seen with my own eyes." The host offered his cup to Bijan, who filled it to the brim. "I have seen conscripts from the north marching south to the beat of whipmaster sergeants. They stop for water in exchange for news, and all the news they bring is of war to the south." He lifted his cup and drank deep. "And the talk from the south is no better. Common folk abandoning their lands, fleeing for the ports, looking for new life across the sea. Not unlike what you are doing, my good man." The butcher nodded his head, looking out of the side of his eyes at Bijan. Suspicion was in those eyes, and a cold hand gripped the boy's heart for fear he had done something wrong. But no reproach came. "Enough of that talk," the butcher said, turning to Bijan. "You may leave us, boy. Leave the wine." Bijan did as he was bid, gingerly placed the cask on the table, opened the creaking door, and stepped out into the night. The moonless chill dug its nails into Bijan, his legs and arms tingling with goose prickles. Though it was a fact of life in the desert, it never ceased to surprise Bijan how cold the nights got. In his thin linen pants and tunic, the dark air punched through his clothing like a quarrel through bronze. He hugged himself and looked towards camp, a small ember of light in the vast expanse of blackness, and began his trek back. War, Bijan thought. Who was fighting? Where? Why? And what did that guardsman mean about fleeing across the sea? Bijan knew little of war, other than the tales his mother used to tell him. Tales of valor, of kings and lords fighting over the love of princesses, fighting gods in their hubris. It was from these stories Bijan had fallen in love with the warrior, though he had never met a true fighting man before. The closest thing to warriors he knew were the caravan's men-at-arms, and they seemed nothing like the tales his mother had spun. Still, if there was war in the land, then maybe there was a chance he could find a warrior, enter his service, and learn from him. He could escape this existence, become strong, and then save his mother. Out of the darkness, a shape blacker than the moonless landscape emerged. A silent demon ghost come to take him. Bijan jumped back, but not before a pair of monstrous claws gripped him, strong and unbreakable. In the darkness, the creature's mouth opened, for Bijan could smell the foulness emanating from its maw. "It's going to eat me." Bijan's mind screamed, and though he wanted to yell, no noise came. Instead, he kicked and thrashed, pushing away from the unseen horror that had come to take him. In the dark, his foot found its mark, his heel striking the creature. "Ow, you little shit!" A familiar voice groaned, and the claws that had once gripped him let go. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, the thing that had been some monstrous demon disappeared and had turned into Red Eye. "Are you wanting me to hurt you, boy? Why did you kick me?" "I didn't mean to," Bijan said, his heart still racing, a part of him afraid he had wet himself. In the darkness, he patted his crotch, relieved to see it was still dry. "You scared me, that's all. You shouldn't have grabbed me like that." "I came here looking for ye to make sure you hadn't run off, so I will do whatever it is I damn well please." The shadow moved and hit Bijan, sending stars across his vision. He fell to the ground, a sack of sticks collapsing in a puff of dust. Bijan put his hand where Red Eye had struck him, and he could feel the warm stickiness of his own blood. "You hit me," Bijan declared, tears welling in his eyes. "Aye, and you'll get more if you don't get your ass back to camp. Come on, get up." Red Eye prodded Bijan with the toe of his boot, though not as hard as he might have. "He knows if he hurts me too much, the butcher will be wroth with him," Bijan thought. "Don't hit me," he said, "or the master will be very angry with you." Red Eye laughed. "That tub of suet? Aye, he'll be mad, but not at me. He will be mad at ye when I tells him ye tried running away. He will whip ye and he will reward me. Now, unless you want to get that whipping, get up and get moving." In the dark, Bijan's fists became rock and his temper fire. He could feel his frame tremble with anger and desire for vengeance. He wanted to attack Red Eye, to bash him over and over again until his face was bloody, the same color as his eyes. He wanted to bash Red Eye for striking him, for making Bijan bleed. But mostly, he wanted to strike the vile soldier down for speaking the plain truth. Red Eye could spin any tale he liked, and no amount of honesty Bijan spoke would spare him from the whip. If Red Eye wanted it, the butcher would whip the boy, just like he had before. "He is too big," Bijan thought. "I can't hurt him. He will knock me over again and again until I've lost my teeth and both my eyes are swollen. And then he will say he beat me for trying to run away." Bijan knew he was powerless, and that powerlessness reminded the boy of the last time he had seen his father. The tears had been running down Bijan's face, from hearing his mother scream and cry, and from seeing the stern, disgusted look etched across his father's face. In that moment, Bijan had wanted to hurt his father, kill his father, but had been powerless to do so. "I said, get up!" Red Eye blindly grasped into the darkness until he found Bijan's wrist and yanked him to his feet. With his other hand, Red Eye shoved the boy in the direction of the camp, almost causing Bijan to lose his feet again. With several stumbling steps, and through the shearing pain of his blistered feet, Bijan regained his balance and staggered towards the camp. The fire in the center of the wagons was burning low, and most of its inhabitants had already turned in. Bijan passed through the wagon circle and into the light, a sanctuary from the heavy, dark, and cold air of the desert. Red Eye followed closely. Bijan walked to the back of the wagon that held the rations, but was stopped by Red Eye. "What are you doing, boy?" Red Eye asked. "Your bedroll is that way." He pointed towards a rolled-up collection of blankets that sat next to the wheel of the wagon and several paces from the fire. "I am getting food. I haven't eaten yet. And ye won't. Not tonight, ye little shit. I'm not watching ye eat." Red Eye walked to the bedroll and stood over it, slightly shaking a manacle and chain. "Now come over here so I can get you trussed up." Bijan felt protest welling up in his throat, but suppressed it. There was no point, and he was suddenly very tired. It was as if all his hurt and exhaustion had waited until this moment to make itself known. His face hurt, his legs hurt, his feet hurt. His eyes blinked slowly and his head felt dizzy. Arguing would only prolong his suffering. Bijan sighed and shuffled over to the bedroll. Kneeling, Red Eye attached the chain to the wagon and then clasped the manacle around Bijan's ankle. The guardsman slipped a key into the iron that was now attached to the boy, turned it, and gave the clasp a hard shake. Satisfied it was attached, he stood. "I don't know why that fat man insists on chaining ye," Red Eye uttered, baffled. "Ye run off into the desert alone. Ye die in the desert alone." He chuckled and lightly kicked Bijan. "Maybe one of these nights I will keep the shackle loose so ye can slip out of it, yes? Then maybe ye run away. Then ye die. And nothing would please me more than ye ending up in some sand wolf's gut." Red Eye laughed again and walked away. Bijan watched him, too tired to be angry. He turned and tended to his bedroll, unrolling 2 wool blankets. He removed his tunic and slipped in between the 2 throws, bunching his removed garment and using it as a pillow, chains clattering as he settled in. A wolf howled in the distance. In the dying light of the fire, Bijan looked to the heavens. Stars blinked and glimmered, and constellations danced their eternal routine. He could see the scorpion and the frog, the cheetah and the wolf, the spider and the maiden mother. And though cosmos swirled above him, magnificent in its infinite fidelity, Bijan did not pay mind. Like nights past, as he lay awaiting sleep, Bijan thought of his life before. He thought of his mother, his father, his siblings. He thought of the farm, the goats, the pomegranate tree. But mostly he thought of the last days he spent there and what transpired. He thought of the end. This was episode 1 of A Boy and the Pirate Prince, Book 1, a series telling the hero's journey of Bijan and how he met the Pirate Prince. Join us next episode and discover more about Bijan, his family, and the circumstances that led to Bijan's trek north across the desert with the butcher.